In this ancient hymn from the Jewish and Christian prayer book known as the Psalms, we hear a faithful person's sense of absolute trust in an omnipotent deity that will protect and sustain them through all life's struggles. As you will hear, the psalmist has some serious complaints about conflicts with others. Listen for how the voice shifts between expressions of confidence and then to grievance, and then back to confidence. Here is Psalm 62 in inclusive language version. For God alone my soul in silence waits. From God comes my salvation. The Lord alone is my rock and my salvation, my stronghold, so that I shall not be greatly shaken. How long will you assail me to crush me, all of you together, as if you were a leaning fence, a toppling wall? They seek only to bring me down from my place of honor. Lies are their chief delight. They bless with their lips, but in their hearts they curse. For God alone, my soul in silence waits. Truly, my hope is in the Lord. God alone is my rock and my salvation, my stronghold, so that I shall not be shaken. In God is my safety and my honor. God is my strong rock and my refuge. Put your trust in the Lord always. O people, pour out your hearts, for God is our refuge. Those of high degree are but a fleeting breath. Even those of low estate cannot be trusted. On the scales, they are lighter than a breath, all of them together. Put no trust in extortion, in robbery. Take no empty pride. Though wealth increase, set not your heart upon it. God has spoken once, twice I have heard it. That power belongs to God. Steadfast love is yours, O Lord, for you repay everyone according to their deeds.
Sometimes I like to think way, way back to the founding of the original congregations that merged to become this one. Back to the 17th century congregation, back to the 17th century period. The preachers that lived then and all of the parishioners lived in a world of signs and wonders. And they would have attributed every fortune and fate that befell the community as an action of the Lord, capital L-O-R-D. The lives of the people who belonged to the First Church of Christ in Lynn, gathered in 1632, searched their souls and their settlements for evidence, always, of God's favor or displeasure, and they adjusted their behavior accordingly, sometimes in very bizarre ways, and sometimes in very traditional ways, fasting and prayer being among those. In the season of Lent, which we are in now, they would have been engaged in penitential reflection in preparation for the Easter resurrection miracle. And they would have been hearing from the pulpit a lot about God's providence, God's caring provision for his people. God is always, in this time, masculine, father, always using him and he, sovereign provider, rock, and salvation. A lot of providence. God will provide. And the people would have interpreted everything that happened to them, including weather patterns, in light of that sense of faith that God would protect them. If that didn't happen, the fault was theirs, not God's. And that was the relationship that they really lived in. That was their worldview. As the centuries passed and scientific explanations and knowledge greatly expanded, the signs and wonders of the old days were demystified. Theology was explored, challenged, questioned, and it evolved. Religious ideas are so divisive, it can feel nerve-wracking even in our spiritual communities to do theological reflection together in our time, and rather to rely on a general sense of privacy, as in, and this is again what we hear nowadays most often, whatever anybody believes, that's fine, that's cool. And it is totally fine. But it's also important to have opportunities that allow us to freely share and explore our own theologies as they continue to evolve personally and collectively. And that's part of why I scheduled a connecting conversation today about doing a deep dive into God concepts. It's a moral imperative to examine theological ideas for worthiness, but not in the way I think that is often done in liberal progressive communities, which is to take those traditional theological ideas out and then announce rational or scientific facts in order to ridicule them or completely debase them or dismiss them. I think this is a weakness of our time and an embarrassment to take material from the realm of mythos, metaphor, and poetry that attempts to speak to deep realities and experiences and to dissect them by the scientific method. There is so much spiritual violence done by this juvenile mentality, and the irony is that those who engage in it don't understand that they themselves are fundamentalists of a kind and zealots, but just of the anti-religious style. Ralph Waldo Emerson really said a mouthful when he wrote, "A person will worship something. Have no doubt about that." In our quest for spiritual growth, it's a responsibility then to note and compassionately interrogate for ourselves, what gods are we installing in our hearts and souls? What is the rock and firm foundation for you? Is it God? Is it something else? Is it rejecting God? Are you clear about whatever it is? And is that thing steadfast, beautiful, and not just a solid place upon which to stand, but a vision provider to aspire to that includes the virtues and the values that are worthy of your life's allegiance? What are we worshiping? Let's first look at what worship is. To worship is to put the self in a position of reverence. Together, we do it in community. What is it that evokes reverence? A worshipful spirit is one of deep consent, even to the point of voluntarily and joyfully submitting and being obedient to that which we deem the highest and of the most worth, which is the root of the word worship, worthship. Toward what do you feel or experience that level of respect? This bears close examination because the religious impulse is a human impulse, and at all times we are being presented with many opportunities to enter into a worshipful relationship. And some of those entities that draw us into that kind of dynamic are national or ethnic identity, New Age gurus, political ideologies, sports organizations, alumni associations, movie fandoms, fitness and diet routines, and certain gyms that are kind of, like religious, ersatz religious communities. All of these entities address deep emotional, social, and spiritual yearnings for belonging, for community, and for transformation. If I pledge my loyalty to this community that practices these beliefs and behaviors, I will become better in some way that will make me feel better and maybe better than other people. All of these entities hold out promises. If you really examine them, they all hold out promises of salvation and transcendence. Many of them, or many of the so-called wellness cults, I notice, because I pay attention to those, because they evoke so much sort of religious fervor among so many people, these wellness cults are obsessed with sin and purity dynamics, but purity has been rebranded as detoxification. The premises upon which are based on pseudoscience. What these cults have in common with traditional religion is that they cultivate a sense of moral righteousness moral righteousness over those who do not worship the right gods and follow orthodox practices. And the cult of self-help, truly the most popular secular religion in America, promotes a doctrine of constant self-improvement, fortune, and success for individuals, while encouraging an ethos of endless competition with the self and comparison with others. That is why self-help has been so successfully co-opted and embraced by corporate America, precisely because it is a religion that keeps true believers focused on their own behaviors and convinces them that their happiness and improvement and well-being is always a result of their own efforts. If you use your mindfulness app more, you will be calmer. Your anxiety has nothing to do with the 16-hour day you're being expected to work, the 24-hour cycle of availability you are supposed to obey, the paltry time off that you get, the skyrocketing cost of healthcare and housing costs and other kind of societal crushing pressures that keep you obsessed with giving your all to the grind. So instead of actually shifting culture or helping people or having an actual justice-based approach to the company, keep them focused on wellness, keep them focused on self-help. As we do an audit of our deep loyalties, we examine our involvements for religious levels of devotion, trust, and hope. What promises, implicit or explicit, have these entities made to us? How much money do they want in order to fulfill those promises? Memberships, fees, etc. Are we placing our faith in them? Is that faith justified? It may be. What do they provide for you? How do they serve you and you them? And who's ultimately reaping benefits? If we do not thoughtfully cultivate our sense of what is deep, true, foundational to our humanity and worth living and dying for, these things will be decided for us by unconscious influences that we are not even aware are shaping our worldview and our theology. This will also happen to our children, whose encounter with peer groups, celebrity influencers, pop culture, and especially the marketplace of both objects and ideas vying for their attention and money, brand loyalty, will build gods for them. We are all susceptible at every age. As the child of two parents who helped me to critique the traditional God of their own Jewish and Russian Orthodox religious upbringings, I ask you from my own heart to add a building project along with the dismantling project you may be engaged in with your children and grandchildren. That is, as we accompany our children in life as what we call resident theologians, let us make sure that we don't just share what we reject, but also to share what we affirm, what we embrace, and what we do have faith in, because they need that too. That's also going to equip them to deal critically with the world. My father died when I was just 17, but I carry with me the many intense conversations we had about the nature of reality, what Tillich called the ground of being. My father was an existentialist, self-described, and he was fond of saying, "Vicky, there is no God but what is within you." He meant that to be empowering, as he wanted me to feel strength in my own confidence and self-reliance. Or he wanted me to be confident in my own strength and self-reliance. It was an enduring gift and psychologically and emotionally important to my well-being to know that even though my dad didn't believe in God, he believed in me. I know what he rejected, and like any child, I was profoundly influenced by his and my mother's opinions, as I was by the humanist, Unitarian, Universalist churches I grew up in and that we attended through my childhood and youth. I was very well prepared, therefore, for intellectual and academic inquiry to take my place among other sophisticated thinking people of the world. Years later, in my 20s, late 20s, I was at a hymn sing hosted by the Unitarian Universalist Christian Fellowship. I knew a lot of the hymns for some reason. I really don't know how I knew so many of them. Maybe through movies or television shows, maybe summer camp even, I don't know, or attending church with friends. I guess these are songs that are just kind of around. We may have even sung some of them in school for all I know. What I loved most in this experience was the feeling of singing heartily, just right out, without reading ahead to see if I agreed with the lyrics. We were having fun, and we were experiencing a really genuine sense of fellowship, spiritual fellowship. People were shouting out hymn names, "Abide with me," and some of the other goodies, and someone shouted out another title, and the pianist started playing, and everyone broke into this hymn, which was apparently a big favorite, and it was one I didn't know. So I looked down at the lyric booklet that we had all been handed when we came in, and I sang along as best I could, and I thought, oh, this is so corny, this is really cute. It starts out, what a fellowship, what a joy divine, leaning on the everlasting arms. And it sounded to me like a song that the Muppets would sing, and people were like putting their arms around each other, and it was so wholesome. And they're going, leaning, leaning, safe and secure from all alarms, leaning, leaning, leaning on the everlasting arms. And I picked it up very easily, swinging along, very folksy, and just having a great time. And I looked around the room at all of these people that I knew. I mean, a lot of people that I knew there were really brainy, thinky types. And they were just singing, what have I to dread, what have I to fear, leaning on the everlasting arms. I have blessed peace with my Lord so near, leaning on the everlasting arms. And nobody was going like, they said, Lord. We have to unpack that. What did we mean by Lord? So I started laughing, and then I started crying. I knew, hey, Dad, you were wrong. Whatever God is. And I knew I would never be able to define God for myself or anywhere or anyone else, and that it didn't matter. It was something that I had just experienced, a ground of being that wasn't just me. It was far greater than me or anything that could be contained with me alone, because I'm not the center of the universe, thank God. And everyone in that room and everywhere, I realized in that moment, had this whatever God is within themselves as well. And that I, from that moment forward, could be part, without worrying about it, part of every story, song, prayer, and work of art that would ever attempt to express the wonder, the grandeur, and the everlastingness of that thing. It was holding me, and it held and upheld me by whatever meager understanding any human being could attempt to have of it. Here I was singing without inner critic stopping me, without inner auditor shutting my mouth and holding me back. And I was just experiencing the love by which I would eventually come to name it, this God, this everlasting arms with others. I was leaning, and I was held, and I knew, so we had all been invited to do, just by virtue of our being alive and conscious, as one small part of this beautiful world. I want to thank Suzanne Forgione for drawing that memory back into my life and inspiring this entire reflection. Bravo, David. Thank you.